Last week, I asked a pretty simple question. If AI was supposed to take all the jobs, where is it? And apparently, the workplace news decided to spend the next 7 days answering me because this week we learned companies that replaced humans with AI are bringing some of those humans back. One of the biggest companies in the world reportedly tried to redesign itself around AI, contemplated shrinking some teams by as much as 60%, and then backed away when the productivity gains didn't exactly show up the way everyone hoped. Professional services companies are being told, we don't want to pay you for the hours anymore, just give us the outcomes. AI is increasingly helping decide who gets hired. And Bill Gates is now proposing that we might literally need to designate some jobs as human reserved. So maybe AI isn't simply changing whether people have jobs. Maybe it's forcing us to reconsider what a job actually is. And honestly, I think that's a much more interesting story. Welcome back to This Week in Work, where we look at what's happening across work, business, and technology and try to figure out what it actually tells us about how organizations are changing. And this week, I want to talk to you about what happens when companies stop thinking primarily about jobs and start thinking about work. Let's start with Upwork. Fast Company interviewed CEO Hayden Brown, who has a pretty unique window into what's happening. Upwork isn't looking at one company's workforce. It's sitting between millions of people selling their skills and companies actively trying to get work done. And according to Brown, Upwork's AI category is growing more than 22% year over year. Okay, that's probably not surprising, but this was 23% of Upwork clients that moved work to AI have already moved some of that work back to humans, or they're about to, which means almost 1 in 4 companies in their survey basically went, we've automated it. And then sometime later, ring, ring, so is Rebecca still available? I love this mostly because it perfectly captures where we are with AI right now. There is this enormous distance between look what this thing can do and this thing can reliably own the work. Those are not the same sentences. Brown said Upwork experimented with clients using agents to complete work products end to end. The agents failed at an incredibly high rate, but when you add some human expertise and interaction into the process, success rates increase by more than 70%. That's important because that doesn't mean humans good, AI bad. It means the system worked better when the two capabilities were designed together. And that sounds obvious, except a surprising amount of corporate AI strategy currently seems to consist of what if we remove the human and see what happens? Apparently, sometimes what happens is you put the human back.
It's a very binary picture. There's the camp of AI is going to take all the jobs and, humans and the companies, that serve humans and do human solutions are doomed. And then there's the other side. The reality has to be somewhere in the middle. We do not see mass job destruction as the future. There is really, I think, a balance to be struck. And, there's creation and destruction, but at the end of the day, it's not all destruction. It actually is a lot of new jobs and roles and businesses that are being born because of this exciting technology.
You announced in May that you had to cut a quarter of Upwork's corporate staff yourselves. You published a pretty frank statement about it, owning the decision. And you talked about AI, but didn't blame AI. Why was that necessary?
Yeah. I made that decision earlier this year because we really did see that with the market conditions that were changing, this was the right time for us to expand the profitability of the business, which was already part of our long-term goals. At the same time, Bob, we've seen that because work is changing, our own work needs to change. And what we did for that was not, really just automating and replacing work or workers with AI. Instead, we looked across the entire business and asked ourselves in every team and every department, what would this look like if we really were doing this function from the ground up today, using the best technology and tools that are available? We also looked at, newer operating organizational models where we could flatten the teams, get more leverage for managers with broader spans of control, fewer layers in the organization. Some of these things that are kind of evergreen opportunities to, refine how we operate.
I mean, there are contentions, I guess, that some CEOs do, like AI washing. They ascribe to AI the reason why they have to make changes, as opposed to, owning that maybe they didn't have the right strategy in the first place. But by blaming it on AI, they get credit for that. Their stock price goes up. It's like it's a positive. And I wonder whether as you were thinking about this, you're like, well, do I lean into that part of the messaging? Because maybe, that helps the story.
It was so important to me that our messaging around this be really true and authentic because frankly, of course, AI is helping us and it is a contributor to our efficiency and our productivity. But that is not the biggest reason, that we made the changes, nor the biggest benefit that we were able to get from and kind of driving these changes. So, we're actually seeing the opposite trend in our platform in the sense that the AI washing that you're talking about has been happening, but also a lot of folks are now reconsidering and coming back because they're seeing that the humans they let go, actually they still need, and the AI can't do all of the things that they hoped that it could do. A recent survey we did showed that 23% of our own clients have actually already moved work back to humans from AI or are about to do so. So I think this pendulum, it will keep swinging. When we've actually done testing of clients trying to use agents directly to deliver work products through our platform, the failure rate of agents is incredibly high. They almost never succeed in delivering even fairly simple tasks from clients end to end. But when you just add a little bit of human expertise and a few back and forths with an expert, suddenly the success rate goes up more than 70%. We have to sharpen our intuition around when to trust AI. And I think increasingly people are realizing, I'm not going to take this at face value. I want to couple that with a valued human expert who can bring a lot more to that equation.
Brown discusses AI-related job growth, the shift from full-time toward fractional work, and Upwork surveys showing freelancing among knowledge workers rising from 28% to 38%. And that second part is where this story gets even more interesting, because the humans aren't simply coming back into the exact same employment structure. The structure itself appears to be changing. Upwork says freelancing among US knowledge workers in its survey went from 28% to 38% in a single year. And Brown says companies are increasingly saying we don't necessarily need the same number of full-time employees we needed before. Now, you could make this an episode about freelancing, but I don't think that's the actual story. I think the story is that companies may be starting to separate two ideas we treated as the same thing for decades: meeting a capability and hiring an employee. Let's say I run a company and I need someone who deeply understands AI implementation. The old question would go, what position should I hire for? The new question is, what capability do I need? Maybe I need a full-time employee. Maybe I need a consultant for 6 months. Maybe I need a fractional leader for 1 day a week. Maybe an existing employee can do it with the right tools. Maybe AI can perform part of it. Maybe 3 different people contribute to different pieces. Or maybe, and I know this sounds insane, we decide work wasn't actually necessary. That part of the work. Companies hate that option. We have an almost supernatural ability to discover new work. But once you start thinking this way, the org chart becomes less useful as a complete picture of the organization. The org chart tells you who reports to whom. It doesn't necessarily tell you where does this capability required to operate this company actually come from. And I think that distinction is going to matter a lot more. And then literally today, Rutgers published what might be the cleanest case study of this entire conversation. Meta reportedly developed an internal initiative called Project OT, short for Organization Transformation. And the idea was ambitious. AI would take over significant amounts of work currently performed by employees. Smaller groups of highly skilled humans would supervise AI-supported systems. Management layers would shrink. Traditional product design and engineering teams would reportedly be consolidated into broader role called builder. Just builder, which nothing intimidating about that, right? Hey, Zach, congratulations. You're no longer a product manager. Oh, what am I? A builder. Of what? Yes, exactly. But according to Reuters, internal scenario planning explored shrinking some teams by as much as 60%. That is not a productivity improvement. That is an entirely different organizational model. And here's the interesting part. It reportedly didn't work the way leadership expected. Reuters say the AI tools created workflow disruptions, productivity improvements underwhelmed, employee morale deteriorated. Meta went through the first round of layoffs, but the larger second restructuring was reportedly abandoned. And the message shifted from AI replacing workers to AI empowering them. That is a pretty important reversal.
Just a little more on the delay of their AI model. I mean, if it is delayed again, or they have to start from scratch again, I mean, obviously Meta has a lot of money to be restarting with. But I mean, it wasn't anywhere near top 3, I would say, for AI models before. Can it really survive in the AI race if it has to start from scratch again, or is again delayed beyond a time that we don't know what's happening? We just got to wait.
It's hard, isn't it? Because I guess you sort of, especially in this field, it feels like timing is everything. So we've talked about in the past the kind of tactics that Google and OpenAI have to kind of just strategically launch new updates or new versions of their LLMs to almost gazump the noise about their rivals, and how beneficial that can be for businesses. And I guess that there is a certain element of internal testing that has happened with Avocado, and what was found was that it wasn't necessarily competing with the rivals' latest editions, and so it's important that it be able to keep pace and catch up, which are two very different, very, very challenging things for Meta to do. And I guess, you've got a situation where last year Google leapfrogged rivals with Gemini 3, which triggered OpenAI to, launch Code Red. OpenAI was really quick to follow with updates to GPT-5. Then you've got Claude Code and Cowork from Anthropic that are really, really reliable LLMs, that are able to do things without a lot of human oversight. And you look by comparison to what Meta is doing, and you see that it's buying Maltbook, which is a social media platform designed exclusively for AI bots, and it just feels like they're in a different kind of mindset, different tactic. It feels like the company is maybe trying to catch up in one way, but also trying to think of different ways to skin the cat with the other. So you've got the big hires, the 20 odd researchers from OpenAI, 50 plus researchers, engineers, and other people from other places, assembling this crack team of people that were going to push it over the edge, and that just hasn't happened yet. That's the fact. And I guess the longer it takes, the harder it'll be for them to catch up.
A damning assessment.
Sorry,
no.
I don't mean it like that. I just think it's hard. It's not personal to Meta. I just think any company in this situation would find it very difficult. And I think it does make sense. The strategy that they've deployed does make sense. You can't compete with Llama at the moment. We hire the best talent to come over at whatever the cost to make that happen. We are concerned about the usability of things, and we're thinking about Meta's existing customer base. Let's think about other things that could complement our universe of AI that might be useful for them to use. All these things make sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will work. That's the problem. And I think the longer the time span, the trickier it becomes, because you have a situation where it's a lot easier to improve on a Gemini than it is to improve on a Llama. So it's the road is tough, and it's just that the gap is widening. And I guess what Meta's trying to do now is not be in a situation where they release something and the company is obviously lagging behind because the functionality of it is not as good as what's already on the market. And that's I think a reasonable thing to want to do.
Earlier coverage of Meta considering major workforce cuts while simultaneously pushing heavily into AI. Now compare that earlier expectation with what Reuters said. This is basically the entire AI at work conversation compressed into one company. So it's not just Meta. But it looks like this. Step 1, AI is going to make everyone dramatically more productive. Step 2, great, we need fewer people. Step 3, let's redesign the company around that assumption. Step 4, wait, the technology isn't actually ready to own everything we designed the organization around. Step 5, employee empowerment, which is corporate for we've updated the slide deck. But seriously, this is why I keep saying AI implementation is increasingly becoming an organizational design problem, because you can't redesign the organization around a hypothetical capability. You have to understand what the technology can reliably do, what humans still need to do, and then design the system around reality, not the demo version of what you think. Now, let's move from employees to companies selling professional work. Reuters reported last week that AI is changing contracts around India's roughly $315 billion IT services industry. Companies including TCS, Infosys, Wipro, HCL Tech, and Cognizant are increasingly being pushed towards contracts tied to outcomes instead of hours worked. And this one may sound like an obscure enterprise service story, but it isn't, because it exposes something weird about how we valued knowledge work for decades. We use time as proximity for value. Consultants sell hours, lawyers sell hours, agencies sell hours, IT companies sell hours, employees basically sell a block of their week. And then AI walks in and says, I can help you do this in 4 hours instead of 20, which sounds fantastic until your business charges for the 20. Then suddenly AI isn't a productivity tool. AI is attacking your price model. Clients are essentially saying, if it takes less time now, why am I paying you for all of that extra time? Fair. But there's another version of the question employees should probably be asking too. If I produce the same outcome in half the time, why does my reward automatically become more work? That's something we talked about last week. And I think these two conversations are connected. Companies are asking vendors, why should I pay for the hours if I can buy the outcome? Employees should probably be asking companies, if the outcome improves, why are hours still the thing you're trying to fill? Organizations have spent years saying, we care about outcomes. We don't care about where you work. We don't care about when you work, as long as the work gets done. Okay, AI may actually force companies to prove that. Because if technology weakens the relationship between time spent and value created, then we need better ways of defining value. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because time is easy. 9 to 5, 40 hours, utilization rate, billable hours, green Slack dots. I can measure those. Outcomes are much harder. What's a good marketing outcome? What's a good management outcome? What's a good research outcome? What's the value of preventing a bad decision? What's the value of mentoring someone? What's the value of someone saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this incredibly stupid thing? Those things matter. They're just harder to put on a dashboard. And technology doesn't remove that difficulty. It actually makes good judgment more important. And then there's hiring. The Guardian reported on lawsuits challenging the use of automated hiring tools, including a class action lawsuit involving Eightfold AI. The plaintiffs allege the system creates profiles, rankings, and predictions about job candidates without adequate transparency into how those decisions were being made. Those allegations are still being litigated. But forget the lawsuit for 1 second. Think about the larger workplace change. AI can increasingly influence what work exists, how companies structure it, who performs it, how it's priced, and now who gets access to it. That's a pretty enormous amount of the employee life cycle.
So going back to the class action side of the house. So back in 2017, I think Talent Ben was in a class action, but they went ahead and settled. So therefore they didn't have to go to discovery. And to be quite frank, our industry and the world needs discovery because we have no clue at this point because of all the black boxes that are out there, not just Eightfolds. We've got so many black boxes that are out there. There has to be a precedent set. And there's not really, or at least I don't know of one, especially in the hiring space, where there's been a precedent set. How do you, I mean, because this is no pressure. This is on you, Rachel. How do we make sure this gets to discovery so we can actually see the data and see what's happening so that companies that are currently doing it can stop, number one, and number two, ones that want to get into the space start to understand, oh shit, maybe we need to do some redesign.
So as lawyers and as lawyers representing a class, it's our ethical obligation to sort of achieve whatever result we think is in the best interest of the class. Sometimes that does mean early settlement. If, for example, I'm not saying that this is what happened in that case. I'm not saying that this is what happened in any specific case. But if sort of the defendant comes and says, we messed up, we're going to change our practices. Let's sort of get this resolved before there's a lot of expensive litigation. Then maybe you'll reach an early settlement. I mean, the other reason why you might reach an early settlement is that you realize your case isn't as strong as you thought. So there are potentially there are situations in which you reach a pre-discovery settlement, and that is the best sort of the best outcome for your class. As lawyers, I think that we are, towards justice, we do litigation. We're in the public interest. We are sort of trying to affect policy and sort of bring attention to issues that we think need more light. And I think this is one of them. But we ultimately have the responsibility sort of to the class to get the best possible result for them. And litigation is expensive, right? So, and discovery is expensive. So there are, I think, incentives on all sides to settle early before all of the money that could potentially go to the class ends up going towards, actually the legal battle. So, I can't know how this case is going to shake out. And we have, again, we have obligations that aren't just sort of purely get to discovery. That said, I do think discovery is a really important way to shine light on a lot of these issues, and is one way that litigation can help advance the public interest.
And this is something I think organizations have to get right, because using the algorithm does not automatically make a decision objective. You can take human bias, put it inside software, and now you've got human bias that can process 20,000 resumes before lunch. Congratulations, scale. Technology can absolutely help make better decisions. But when the decision affects someone's job, their pay, their career, there still needs to be a human somewhere who is accountable for what happens. Computers said no, cannot be a management philosophy. And then earlier this week, Bill Gates published a roughly 6,000 word essay about AI. And one of his ideas is something he calls human reserved. Basically, jobs or responsibilities that we intentionally choose to keep human, even if technology eventually becomes capable of doing them. He compares it to a nature reserve. We could develop the land. We deliberately choose not to because we think something there is important and worth preserving. And I'm not sure I agree with the solution yet, but I really like the question underneath it. Because we've mostly approached automation like this. If technology can do something, should technology do it? Those aren't the same questions. Can AI provide companionship? Probably. Should every form of companionship become artificial? Different question. Can AI teach? Yes. Should children spend their entire education learning from machines? Different question. Can an algorithm choose a candidate? Increasingly. Should no human ever review that decision? Different question. And this gets us to what I think the entire episode is actually about. Look at everything happening at the same time. Upwork says companies are bringing some work back to humans, but they're also using more fractional talent. Meta reportedly tried building dramatically smaller teams around AI and discovered the technology wasn't ready for the organization it had designed around it. IT service companies are increasingly being paid for outcomes instead of hours. AI is influencing who gets hired, and Bill Gates is asking whether there should be some things we deliberately choose to keep human. These aren't separate AI stories. They're all asking the same question. How should work be designed when technology changes what's possible? That's the story. Not how many jobs disappear. That's one possible outcome. The bigger transition is everything surrounding the job. And before we convince ourselves this is exclusively a white-collared problem, there's one more story worth watching. Unitree's CEO Wang Xingxing said last week that robotics may be approaching its own ChatGPT moment. His definition of that moment is basically put a robot into an unfamiliar environment, tell it what you need through normal language, and it successfully performs most of the tasks. He thinks that kind of breakthrough could be somewhere between 2 and 10 years away.
The dream of a robot foundation model makes possible that you can just walk up to a robot and get it to do any task almost immediately and generalize that behavior. Our new model, Gen 1.5, is an immediate learning generalist. It's a one-shot learner. It can learn and generalize new tasks in seconds, prompted in context. It can compose prompts together to learn longer horizon tasks. It can be prompted from a simulator and transfer those behaviors into the real world. And in some cases, it can just watch humans and mimic them immediately on the spot. For few-shot learning, it can learn new tasks with as few as 1 to 10 gradient steps on 1 to 5 minutes of data. And it's showing physical generalization, including improvising how to use new tools to accomplish tasks. And it does all these things out of the box. The fastest way it learns is with zero training on a new task and just a few seconds of demonstration data put into the model's context. We show the robot what to do, and it generalizes it. We call this physical prompting. We've done variations of in-context prompting for about a year now, but what we're seeing for the first time is a very generalized in-context learning capability. These tasks are simple today, and while the success rates are not super high, we've never seen a model that can do this before. It's not something we explicitly trained for, but has emerged from our new training recipe. Beyond its context, it can also learn with extremely few training steps, and among the new levels of physical generalization we are seeing is novel tool use improvisation. In one example, we taught it to use a brush to sweep a block into a bowl. And when we gave it a banana instead, it could figure out how to turn the banana into an impromptu brush. And when we gave it a dustpan, it used its other hand to nudge the block onto the dustpan and then raised the block up and dumped it into the bowl. It could also sweep multiple objects and figure out how to switch hands ambidextrously. It's overall showing more improvisational intelligence than previous models. It had a Lego brick stuck on one of its hands, and it used its other hand to remove it. We had taught it to put blocks into a bowl, but then we covered the bowl with a piece of paper, and it removed the piece of paper to accomplish its task. We taught it to open a jar lid with one hand, and then it just did it with two hands. And when we gave it different bottles and cups, it figured out how to open those too. We're also starting to see human to robot in context learning emerge, where a person can just show the robot what to do with their own human hands, and the robot mimics it on the spot with its hands. We are still in the very early days, but we're tremendously excited about the potential of this new frontier of intelligence in robot foundation models.
And right now, the hardware is ahead of the intelligence required to make these machines broadly useful. So please don't watch one robot do a backflip and fire your warehouse. We've apparently learned nothing if we do that. And I wouldn't make too much of that today. The technology still has huge limitations, but it matters because the organizational question we're discussing doesn't stop with knowledge work. Eventually, more physical work enters the same conversation. What is the task? What can technology do reliably? Where does human judgment matter? Where does human dexterity matter? Where does the customer actually want a human? And how should we design the work around it? Okay, so what should we actually do? I think leaders should start with 4 things. Stop starting with headcount. Most workforce planning starts like this. We need another marketer. We need 3 engineers. We need a project manager. Go one level earlier. What work needs to happen? What outcomes are we trying to create? What capability does that require? Then decide whether the answer is a full-time employee, a current employee, a freelancer, a specialist, automation, AI, or some combination. And occasionally, the answer is nobody or nothing because the work was pointless. That is allowed. Number 2, design human and AI work instead of automating human work. Upwork's data should be a warning here. Don't ask, how much of Sarah can I automate? That's a terrible organizational design question. Ask, what do the best systems for doing this work look like? Maybe AI does the research. A human identifies what's important. AI produces alternatives. The human chooses. AI handles repetitive execution. The human owns the customer relationship. Now you're designing work. You're not just removing tasks until the job looks like Swiss cheese. Number 3, if time matters less, get much better at defining value. This will become increasingly important. If AI makes work faster, you cannot manage knowledge workers purely through activity. You need clarity around outcomes, quality, decision-making, customer impact, learning, revenue, risk, whatever actually matters for that particular role. Otherwise, the future becomes AI makes everyone faster and managers fill the newfound capacity with more activity because activity is the only thing they know how to measure. Which brings us right back to the overworked people, just faster. Number 4, decide what should remain human before the technology decides for you. I don't know whether we literally need Gates' human reserved classification, but I think every organization needs its own version of the question. Where does a human need to remain accountable? Where does empathy matter? Where does trust matter? Where does lived experience matter? Where does apprenticeship matter? Where do we want a person involved even if software becomes technically capable of performing the task? Because capability should inform the design, it shouldn't automatically determine it. And that leads us to the bigger point. This is the part I think that's getting lost in the AI conversation. We're treating technological capability like organizational destiny. AI can automate this, therefore we automate it. AI can reduce the number of people, therefore we reduce the number of people. AI can measure something, therefore we measure it. AI can make someone 30% faster, therefore we give them 30% more work. Why? Those are choices. And we've been making versions of those choices for decades. Email made communication easier, we communicated more. Slack made people more reachable, we reached them constantly, all the time. Software made work easier to measure, we measured everything. Automation saved time, so we filled the time with more work. People were overworked long before generative AI showed up. That's what I don't want us to forget. We already had workload problems, bad managers, poor resource allocation, too many meetings, too many priorities, micromanagement, very little uninterrupted time to think. Jobs that somehow accumulated 17 responsibilities because nobody ever removed one. Those are work problems, not technology problems. And AI gives us an opportunity to either make them dramatically worse or finally start fixing some of them. Imagine the other version. AI makes research faster. Great. Maybe the answer isn't twice as many reports. Maybe it's one significantly better decision. AI removes repetitive administration. Great. Maybe someone gets 2 hours of uninterrupted thinking back. AI gives a manager better visibility. Great. Maybe they stop asking 12 employees for status updates. You get the point. We talked about this last week. But this version of technological progress is generally exciting, but it shouldn't be humans versus AI. It should be about how we create better work and design organizations to take advantage of that. That's the opportunity. So last week I asked, where is the AI job apocalypse? This week, I think the answer became a little clearer. Maybe we're looking for something too obvious. Millions of jobs disappearing. One enormous unemployment spike. Humans out, AI in. Reality looks much messier. The job can stay while everything around the job changes. Who does it? Where the capability comes from? Whether that person is full-time? How the work gets priced? How performance gets measured? How someone gets hired? Which pieces AI performs? Which pieces humans own? And eventually, whether some work should intentionally remain human even when technology can do it. So I don't think the question leaders should obsess over is how many people can AI replace? I think it's now that technology changes how this work can be done, how should we redesign or design the work? And I would add one more thing. How do we design it so progress actually makes work better? Not cheaper, not just faster, not just capable of producing more. Better for the company, better for the customer, and yes, better for the person doing the work, employees. Because technology isn't going to make that decision for us. The leaders leading it will. I'm Zach Wright. This is This Week in Work, and I'll see you next week.